ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। So among the works of Swami Vivekananda, most of it, maybe around 90%, are his talks and interviews. Those talks, most of you know that, were transcribed by J.J. Goodwin. But there are some of his writings also, though very few. In Bengali, we have some writings, Babbar, Kotha, Pracho, Paschatto, and all. And today's discussion, this was also written by Swamiji. Very few of his writings we have, because he simply didn't have the time to write. He was like a tornado. So this was a paper. Today is what we will discuss. This was a paper presented by Swamiji to a journal. So naturally, we can just discuss the important points, and the language is also a little, let me say, it is not so easy to understand. But after all, Swamiji's English was quite simple. He kept it simple. So I think we will have a general idea of this concept of reincarnation in ancient civilizations, including, of course, the Indian civilization. So in this paper, he first starts with this riddle which faces mankind. What is that? He says, of the many riddles that have perplexed the intellect of man in all climes and times, the most intricate is himself. He has found it much easier to probe the external world than the internal world. Of the myriad mysteries that have called forth his energies to struggle for solution from the dawn of history, the most mysterious is his own nature. It is at once the most insoluble enigma and the problem of all problems. As the starting point and the repository of all we know and feel and do, there never has been nor will be a time when man's own nature will cease to demand his best and foremost attention. That is the closest to us, our own nature. So, though mankind has sometimes stumbled, has not found the right path, but he can never give up the struggle. So how he has stumbled, Swamiji says there's one big sentence, he says, though through hunger after the truth, now he describes that truth. He mentions three characteristics of that truth, which is inside us, our own nature. First, he says, which of all others has the most intimate connection with his very existence? Naturally, our most intimate connection is with what we are. Second, though through an all-absorbing desire for an inward standard by which to measure the outward universe. And third, though through the absolute and inherent necessity of finding a fixed point in a universe of change. This is our eternal struggle. We are looking for permanence in all our endeavors. Hmm. We are looking for something which will never leave us, which will can be the pole through which we can take hold of and face other struggles. But the problem is there is no such permanent thing in the external universe. And we keep on searching externally only. Therefore, we cease to find it. Everything we take hold of leaves us one day or the other. So, though all this is there, and through these man has sometimes clutched at handfuls of dust for gold. He thinks it is gold, but it is not. It is just dust. So he has faced failures, though he has faced failures. And even when urged on by a voice higher than reason or intellect, he has many times failed rightly to interpret the real meaning of the divinity within. Although failures are there has to be failures in any endeavor. Still, never was there a time since the search began when some race or some individuals did not hold aloft the lamp of truth. So, in spite of the struggle, in spite of the mistakes, in spite of the failures, there never was a time in the world in which people holding to this truth were found wanting. In some civilization, some race, always we have found that yes, people have found the truth and held on to that. But we all know that this is a very difficult struggle. The inward struggle is very difficult. So many times human beings gave up the search out of despair. What were the three main reasons for this despair? First, he says, taking a one sided, cursory, and prejudiced view of the surroundings and the unessential details. This was first reason. One sided, cursory, and prejudiced view. Then, second reason, sometimes disgusted also with the vagueness of many schools and sects. So even if you just open any book or even on Indian philosophy, there are so many beliefs, so many sects, all seemingly contradictory, that anybody will think, my God, just to study this will take a whole life. So after studying, trying to find out the truth, absolutely impossible. Even the great Swami Vivekananda in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it is there. He is asking the Master, one who was already perfect from birth, he is asking that there are so many thoughts, how to know which is correct? So we can imagine the ordinary man. And third is, why did mankind sometimes give up the struggle? He was driven to the opposite extreme by the violent superstitions of organized priestcraft. In every field it is there, people who are striving to take advantage of our beliefs. So, priest will promulgate any mumbo jumbo to confuse us and to try to convince us that the only way of salvation is through them. So all sorts of superstitions crept in like that. But although these cases are there, man has sometimes given up the search for despair. But there is no doubting, he says, truth finally comes to those who worship God for God's sake only. Not to get this, get that, and without fear and without shopkeeping. They don't go out of fear that, oh Lord, please save me from hell. Please ensure that I don't have stomach aches as long as I live. Hmm. And they have no shopkeeping. Oh Lord, today I've given a donation of $10. Please give 1,000 in return. So they don't bargain like that. So if these three are there, worshipping God just to know God, just to attain God, there is no fear behind that and there is no shopkeeping, then Swamiji says truth has to come today or tomorrow. It has to shine within our hearts. Then he continues, light comes to individuals through the conscious efforts of the intellect. Sitting idle won't do. It comes slowly though to the whole race through unconscious percolations. Percolation we know, when water, because of gravity, it seeps through the soil. So that is slower. When it comes to the race, it is slower. But individuals, if they make hard efforts, conscious efforts, then the truth will come quicker to them. The philosophers show the volitional struggles of great minds. History reveals the silent process of permeation through which truth is absorbed by the masses. So, barring the rare few exceptionally qualified persons, on the whole, the masses can grasp the truth only gradually. We never see that the whole race has become spiritual overnight. That can never be. Now, of all the theories that have been held by man about himself, that about the entity of a soul which is separate from the body and immortal has been the most widespread in all races. And among those that held the belief in such a soul, the majority of the thoughtful had always believed also in its pre-existence. So two things he has said. First of all, amongst all the beliefs, the most common belief is that what? Behind this mind and body, there is something which is separate. And that which is separate also had a pre-existence. The very fact that it had a pre-existence shows that it will also continue to exist when our current bodies are gone. So it is a chain. There cannot be a present without a past. And if there is a future, there has to be a present. So at present, the greater portion of the human race, having organized religion, believe in it in some form or the other. And many of the best thinkers, though nurtured in religions avowedly hostile to every idea of the pre-existence of the soul, have endorsed it. Hinduism and Buddhism have it for their very foundation. The educated classes among the ancient Egyptians believed in it. The ancient Persians arrived at it. The Greek philosophers made it the cornerstone of their philosophy. The Pharisees among the Hebrews accepted it. And the Sufis among the Mohammedans almost universally acknowledged its truth. So Swami Vivekananda's language, see, all these races have accepted it in one sentence, that they have accepted in how many ways he has told. First he has told Hinduism and Buddhism have it for their foundation. Among the Egyptians believed in it. Persians arrived at it. Greek philosophers made it the cornerstone of their philosophy. Pharisees accepted it. Mohammedans almost universally acknowledged its truth. See, He was a master, you see, he was a master of so many. So there must be peculiar surroundings which generate and foster certain forms of belief among nations. Because each nation has a particular culture, tradition. So each has some different type of surroundings which generate and foster certain beliefs. So the whole scenario is such that certain beliefs are ingrained in a person born in a particular country. Like those who are born in India, naturally, the whole environment is such that without knowing, this seeps in. In Western, some other values seep in, even without their knowing. So it required ages for the ancient races to arrive at any idea of this truth, any idea about a part even of the body surviving after death. It took ages. It took ages more to come to any rational idea about this something, whatever it is, which persists and lives apart from the body. To get a complete idea, a rational idea about this theory of reincarnations, it took ages and ages for the best minds. Now we are having it on a platter, and that is why most probably we don't appreciate it. This wisdom of the ages, which thousands of sages have devoted their whole lives to it, given up all, sacrificed everything. They have given it to us. But because many times, because something is very easily available, we don't recognize the value. So regarding this, there is an incident in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting with his devotees, and Vijay Krishna Goswami, he was a very great soul. He was also sitting beside the master. So to all those who were sitting there, Vijay Krishna said that because the master is so easily available, just come from Calcutta and his door is always open. That's why we don't realize what a great fortune it is. If some Mahatma was there in some hill and you had to wait 10 days for an interview, then we would have thought that, yeah, he's a great person. But because Master is so simple, we don't realize. So this is true of in all times. Now Swamiji starts his discussion about what the ancient races have thought about this. So first he starts the ancient Hebrews. Hebrews never really concentrated upon this. They were much more concerned with the present, with the world, rather than afterlife or something which is beyond the world. So he says the ancient Hebrews never disturbed their equanimity by questioning themselves about the soul. With them, death ended everything. So Swamiji quotes one maybe historian, Karl Haeckel. So he quotes him. Karl Haeckel justly says, though it is true that in the Old Testament preceding the exile, the Hebrews distinguish a life principle which is different from the body, which is sometimes called nephesh or ruach. Yet these words correspond rather to the idea of breath than that of the spirit or the soul. So they did not have a clear conception of this, and they were not really bothered. Also in the writings of the Palestinian Jews, there is never made mention of an individual immortal soul but always only of a life breath emanating from God, which after the body is dissolved is reabsorbed into the divine, which is they called Ruakh. So pronunciation, of course, I'm not sure. Maybe Ruach. Now he comes to the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians had peculiar beliefs of their own about the soul. So they believed in a soul. But this belief was completely different from that of the ancient Hindu or the Persian or the Greek or any other Aryan race. So we all know, we have studied in schools, how these pyramids were built for pharaohs and the mummies were embalmed and kept. So we think that they also must have a conception that the soul is still alive. Yes, to a certain extent that is true, but this conception was completely different from the Aryan races. What was the conception? Swamiji says there was from the earliest times a broad distinction between the Aryans and the non-Sanskrit speaking people in the conception of the soul. And this was typified by the disposal of the dead. How the body was treated after death shows us how different the views were. So the non-Aryans, they tried to preserve the dead bodies by careful burial and the more elaborate process of mummifying. So they try to keep the body in a good condition as far as possible, while the Aryans generally burned their dead. So this shows the difference in viewpoint. Herein lies the great secret, he says, that these races, whether Egyptians, Assyrians, or Babylonian, never attained to the idea of the soul as a separate entity which can live independent of the body. If the soul is independent of the body, as the Aryans believe, what is the necessity of preserving the body? So they obviously linked the soul, departed soul, with the body. That is why they wanted to keep the body. That is the thing. So what was the belief of the ancient Egyptians? The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was only a double, having no individuality of its own and never able to break its connection with the body. They thought that even after a person dies, the soul is connected to the body. And not only that, they thought that it will persist only as long as the body lasts. That is why they try to preserve this body. And if by chance the corpse is destroyed, the departed soul must suffer a second death and destruction. So it is so completely different from the belief of the Aryans. So the soul after death was allowed to roam freely all over the world. But at night, according to them, at night it would return to where the corpse was. And another feature of another belief was that when the soul went out of the body, it was terribly miserable. It was always hungry and thirsty. Always it was desirous to enjoy life once more. And because it could not fulfill its desire in that birth, it used to come to where the body was and start weeping and crying. If any part of its old body was injured, the soul was also invariably injured in its corresponding part, because they thought it is connected, you see. And this idea explains the solicitude of the ancient Egyptians to preserve their dead. At first, the deserts were chosen as the burial place, but because the dryness of the air did not allow the body to perish soon, they chose the desert, thus granting to a departed soul a long lease of existence. The body will be there maybe for 1,000 years, so the soul will also exist. In course of time, one of the gods discovered the process of making mummies, through which the devout hope to preserve the dead bodies of their ancestors for almost an infinite length of time. Thus, securing immortality for the departed soul. But one thing is not clear: if they thought that the soul was miserable, why did they want it to be immortal? Yeah. So this soul which has gone out, it was always weeping, and there was always a regret in its heart, because it had left the body through which it could enjoy the world. So the departed, according to them, they said, "O my brother," exclaimed the departed, "withhold not thyself from drinking and eating, from drunkenness, from all enjoyment and following the desire by night and day. Put not sorrow within thy heart, for what are the years of man upon earth? This state after death is a land of sleep and heavy shadows." So all this, it has been conjectured. This was their belief, that after leaving the body, the soul is very much connected to the body, and it is in terrible misery. Now he mentions among the Chaldeans also. So these are Catholics, most of whom are in Iraq now. So there are currently an estimated 250,000 Christians remaining in Iraq, of whom 80% are adherents of the Chaldean Catholic Church. So Swamiji mentions maybe at that time there were much more in number, we don't know. That was more than 100 years ago. So Swamiji says, although they did not speculate so much as the Egyptians as to the condition of the soul after death, but for them also the soul is still a double and is bound to the sepulchre, so that we know the small room or monument built of stone in which the dead body is laid or buried. So there also the connection was there between the departed soul and the place of its burial. They also could not conceive a state without this physical body, and expected a resurrection of the corpse again. Someday the soul will again enter, the corpse will become alive. So for them also, the same belief existed as the Egyptians, with a little modifications. Thus we find that the ancient Egyptians or Chaldeans never could entirely disassociate the idea of the soul from the corpse. That is the thing. According to them, the state of earthly existence was the best. There is nothing superior. And the departed are always longing to have one more chance to renew this. That is their concept. That after death you will be miserable because you will have been forced to leave this beautiful world. So Swamiji now comments, this is not the soil out of which any higher knowledge of the soul could spring. It was grossly materialistic. That enjoyment from the body through the body is the all in all. So that's what he says. In the first place, it is grossly materialistic, and it is also one of terror and agony. Frightened by the almost innumerable powers of evil, and with hopeless, agonized efforts to avoid them, the souls of the living, like their ideas of the souls of the departed, wander all over the world. And that's why these people could never get beyond this idea. of the soul being connected to the body even after death. That is the thing. Now, he says, now we must, for the higher ideas about the soul, he says, we must turn elsewhere. So we must turn now for the source of the higher ideas of the soul to another race, whose God was an all-merciful, all-pervading being, manifesting himself through various bright, benign, and helpful gods. The first of all the human race who addressed their God as Father. Oh, take me by the hands even as a father takes his dear son. That is said in one of the prayers. And with whom life was a hope and not a despair. And whose religion was not the intermittent groans escaping from the lips of an agonized person during the intervals of a life of mad excitement, but whose ideas come to us redolent with the aroma of the field and forest, whose songs of praise, spontaneous, free, joyful, like the songs which burst forth from the throats of the birds when they hail this beautiful world illuminated by the first rays of the sun, come down to us even now through the vista of 80 centuries as fresh calls from heaven. See the language. So, this voice is still coming down to us. So, we turn for this voice to the ancient Aryans. For this hopeful message, for the merciful, benign, all-pervading God. And this view of life, which is not all groaning and suffering after death, we have to go to these people. So what are the characteristics of this race? He mentions 4 important characteristics. First, about their beliefs. First, according to them, God was an all-merciful, all-pervading being, manifesting himself through various smaller gods. They are called devas. Second, life was full of hope and not a despair. There is hope in each page of our scriptures, of the Upanishads, of the Gita, of our saints and sages. They all tell you one thing, that you are by nature divine. You don't have to manufacture divinity or become a god. You are always divine. You were divine. What can be a greater message of hope? There can be nothing else. So, with whom life was a hope and not a despair and crying and suffering because you could not enjoy through the body. Third, whose religion was not the intermittent groans escaping from the lips of an agonized man during the intervals of a life of enjoyment, excitement, eat, drink and make merry. Fourth, whose ideas come to us as joyful calls from heaven, like the songs which burst forth from the throats of the birds when they hail this beautiful world. So one of the prayers he again quotes, place me in that deathless, undecaying world where there is the light of heaven and everlasting lustre shines. So in one of the songs of the great Saint Ram Prasad also he says that in that divine world, he says, there is no Rajani. Rajani means night. There is no night there. It is all bliss. There is not even a trace of sorrow in your real nature. So many prayers he mentions, from the Vedas, make me immortal in that realm where dwells the king Vivaswan's son, where is the secret shrine of heaven. Another prayer, in the third sphere of inmost heaven, where worlds are full of light, make me immortal in the realm of bliss. So, how different? The concept is completely different. So, he says we find at once a whole world of difference between these two ideas, the non-Aryans and the Aryans. To the one, this body and this world are all that are real, all that are desirable. A little life fluid which flies off from the body at death to feel torture and agony for the loss of the enjoyments. They fondly hope it can be brought one day back to the body. Corpse will become alive again. But the Aryans found out that something that which has left the body, which leaves the body after death, they found out that this was not some groaning soul who is again terribly anxious to get a body, but they said what leaves the body is the real nature of the man. This is the real man. And when separated from the body, it enjoyed a state of bliss higher than it ever enjoyed when it was in the body. So a little, I have also read, of course not much, but maybe most of you have read some near-death experiences. People are very fond of knowing what will happen afterwards. So there, as what little I have read, I have not found that persons are telling they are suffering terribly. They see some light, they see that they are traveling. So here we find the germ out of which a true idea of the soul could come and did come. Here it was, where the real man was not the body, but the soul. And all ideas of inseparable connection between the real man and the body were totally absent. Body has been left by the soul. It is now completely free from the body. There is no need of keeping the body any longer. So from this noble idea arose the idea of freedom. Freedom of the soul. And it was when the Aryans penetrated even beyond the shining cloth of the body with which the departed soul was enveloped. So this is the concept in the beginning. What? That your soul, my soul are different. And it is clothed in a shining outer garment, so to say. That is called the subtle body. So that is in the beginning. But the Aryans did not stop at that. So this was just the starting point. And it led to finding out the real nature, ultimately true, of the soul. What? A formless, individual, all-pervading reality. Individual not in that sense, because the question of individuality does not come there. Formless, all-pervading reality. There is no place where the soul does not exist. So ultimately, that limited soul also was merged in the infinite, all-pervading reality. So it was in India and among the Aryans that the doctrine of the pre-existence, the immortality, and the individuality of the soul first arose. Individuality means we are talking on the lower plane now. Jivatma, the individual soul. So recent researches in Egypt have failed to show any trace of the doctrines of an independent and individual soul existing before and after the earthly phase of existence. So it is obvious that they never cherished those views. Later on, we find the Alexandrian Jews imbued with the doctrine of an individual soul. And the Pharisees of the time of Jesus, as already stated, not only had faith in the individual soul, but believed in its wandering through various bodies. So, from this, it is easy to find how Christ was recognized as an incarnation of an older prophet. And they believed that Jesus himself directly asserted that John the Baptist was the prophet Elias come back again. So this is there in the New Testament. Swamiji also gives the source, Matthew 11:14. Jesus says, or I don't know who says, of course he has just quoted. So the quotation is, if you will receive it, this is Elias. So Elias was one of the greatest and most holy prophets of the Old Testament. So they believed that that prophet had again come as Jesus Christ. Like we believe that the same God had come at Sri Rama, had come at Sri Krishna as Chaitanya. So the ideas of a soul and of its individuality among the Hebrews evidently came through the higher mystical teachings of the Egyptians, who in turn derived it from India. Now he says, let us come to the Greeks. Coming to the Greeks, Pythagoras is said to have been the first Greek who taught the doctrine of rebirth. As an Aryan race already burning their dead and believing in the doctrine of an individual soul, it was easy for the Greeks to accept the doctrine of reincarnation through the Pythagorean teachings. Pythagoras may have taught it the first time, but their culture already they were burning the dead. And already they believed in the doctrine of the individual soul. So for them it was very easy to support, to believe in the theory of reincarnation also. And according to one source, Pythagoras had come to India, where he had been instructed by the Brahmins. It is not strange, because in Alexander's life we find that Alexander was greatly impressed with one of the sages of India, of his great wisdom and knowledge. Swamiji himself tells a small story in this regard. So, among the Greeks, Plato presented accounts of reincarnation in his works, where he also has his teacher Socrates, prior to his death, state, according to Plato, before his death, Socrates had said what? I am confident that there is truly such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead. So yes, quoted, but of course nobody really knows. So maybe Socrates also believed in this theory. So the next Swamiji says, the Orphic religion, which taught reincarnation in about the 6th century BC, produced a very great literature in this regard. Its founder was Orpheus, and he was a very ancient person. He is said to have lived several generations before Homer. He taught that the immortal soul aspires to freedom, while the body holds the soul prisoner. The body is imprisoning us, and we also believe the same thing. So according to Orpheus, the wheel of birth revolves, the soul alternates between freedom and captivity. And he claimed need of the grace of the gods and of self-purification. So similar to our belief. We also believe that the grace of God should be there and spiritual practices should be there so that we can purify our minds. So Orpheus also believed that the need of the grace of the gods and self-purification until the soul has completed the ascent. It regains immortality and lives forever. So far we have learned that whenever the soul was held to be an individual, the real man, and not just something which is animating the body, the doctrine of its pre-existence had inevitably come. And that externally those nations that believed in the independent individuality of the soul had almost always signified it by burning the bodies. They knew that the soul would continue to live. There is no need of the body at all. Now he comes to the another ancient Aryan race, the Persians. So he says, though one of the ancient Aryan races, the Persian, developed at an early period and without any Semitic influence, a peculiar method of disposing of the bodies of the dead, the very name by which they call their towers of silence comes from the root da, which means to burn. It is da or da. So this is actually Swamiji says so many things in this one sentence. So you have to understand this. First of all, Persians developed at an early period a peculiar method of disposing the dead. We will see what it is. Those were through what they called the towers of silence. So I will show you the picture of one of those towers. And I will also share that picture with those who are online. Once again. So those who are online, I think they can see this. So this is one of the towers of silence. So what was their method of disposal? This is in Iraq. They simply laid down their dead in those towers. They had various circles made. One for children, one for maybe men, one for women, like that. So when someone died, they just laid those bodies there so that the elements could take care of the dead. So sometimes even vultures and all. So this was their belief. But it was not without any reason. So their method was exposing human corpses to the elements for their decomposition. It was not without logic. They said, by this we are avoiding the contamination of the soil. So carrion birds, usually vultures and other scavengers, consume the flesh. And skeletal remains are gathered into a central pit where further weathering and continued breakdown occurs of the body. So these towers are where the bodies were laid. I don't know whether they are still doing this or not. I think they must be extinct this practice. So these towers are called dakhmas, Dakhmas, or towers of silence. So Swamiji says this word dakhmas comes from the root Daha. Daha means to burn. So Swamiji says, from this very word, we can make out their concept of the soul. Actually, this method of their disposing of the body was first documented in the 9th century, Persians, and towers came to be built later. Because maybe they wanted to segregate, just rather than leaving the body anywhere, have a specific place for that. So Swamiji says now, in short, the races who did not pay much attention to the analysis of their own nature, they never spent time on that. Those races never went beyond the material body. That is all. Keep the body happy. Till you're in the body, you're all right. You can enjoy, you can see so many things. After that, you'll have to suffer. So, those who did not pay much attention to that analysis, they never got beyond the body. And even when driven by higher light to penetrate beyond, they only came to the conclusion that somehow or the other, at some distant period of time, the body will become perfect. It will become incorruptible. We will live forever. I was amazed to find that even now, people are spending so much money for this kind of immortality. Research is going on to make the body live forever. Just imagine. I mean, unbelievable. Because this sense enjoyment is so deeply ingrained in our nature, we cannot think of even giving it up. So we want to continue beyond death also with these enjoyments. So Swamiji says, on the other hand, the races which spend the best part of its energies into this inquiry into the real nature of man as a thinking being, that Indo-Aryan race, they soon found out that beyond this body, beyond even the shining body, which is the subtle body, is the real man, the real principle. He is one who clothes himself with this body. Then again throws off the body when the body is worn out. That is the real man. It is not at all connected to the body. Never it was connected to the body except through ignorance, like we are connected now. Now this principle, the real man, was it ever created? Indo-Aryans say creation means something coming out of nothing. And that can never happen. The soul is without birth and without death. It is not a compound or combination. Only something which is a compound is manufactured. It is built. It comes into existence. All the things we see in the universe, they are compounds. Some materials have been put together. This house is a compound, made of so many things, including the basic structure, wood and all. This carpet is a compound, woven out of threads. Our clothes are compound, everything is a compound. But the soul is not a compound or combination, but an independent existence, simple existence. As such, it cannot be created or destroyed. So what is happening? The soul is only traveling through these states. That's all. So suppose you want to go to Toronto just to see what it is like. We go to Toronto, come back again. Then you want to go to and see Europe. You go and see Europe, come back again. After you've seen all that, you say, I have had enough of all these. Same buildings, same mountains, same trees. Why spend thousands of dollars? So here also the soul goes through all these states. Thinking, oh, maybe I can get ice cream somewhere, I can get a pizza somewhere. So after having enjoyed all this, the soul finds out there is nothing in the external world through which I need to travel, take so much pain. What I have within myself is much, much greater. That is the thing. So this in brief, and of course we have not gone through the whole thing. It is much bigger. You can read for yourself. So in this brief manner, Swami Vivekananda tells us about what the ancient civilizations, apart from the Indo-Aryans, have thought about the soul and its reincarnation. And then he also quotes some of the great modern European thinkers and what they have said. I'll just quote one. Schopenhauer writes, "What sleep is for the individual, death is for the will." He calls that will. It would not endure to continue the same actions and sufferings throughout an eternity without true gain if memory and individuality remain to it. So the soul, if it was burdened with memory through birth after birth, then it could not continue the same actions and sufferings. So what does it do? It flings them off. In next birth, we won't remember what we have done in this birth. And through this sleep of death, it reappears, fitted out with another intellect. This is his view, not our view. According to Hindus, the mind continues, same mind, continues birth after birth. And we can get rid of that only after we achieve illumination. So he quotes some other European thinkers also. And then finally, Swamiji gives logical reasons why the concept of reincarnation is absolutely logical. It is not just some superstition. So we can discuss those when we study the Hindu view of reincarnation, what Vedanta says about it. So we could just glimpse and we could appreciate, of course, his scholarship was unmatched and his wonderful language. I have simplified it, broken it up, otherwise sometimes the sentences are so big and he mentions so many things that you have to read at least twice or thrice to get the thread of that. So I'm sure you have had enough for today. Let us. Yeah, Swamiji's absolutely brilliant expositions.
Swami Vivekananda's one book.
Yeah, it is there. Yeah.
Moral
Reincarnation. It is English is reincarnation, I think.
Yeah.
I have also read that, but not completely. And actually, he quotes many persons. So we'll have to see what we can take from there because a whole lot of quotations will simply bore you. I think he must have written that book.
Yeah.
So naturally, it was a very scholarly work. He was my great. His Medha intellect was great.
Yeah.
Vedananji also amazing. Yeah. In very young age, he had completed everything. Eastern, Western philosophy, Sanskrit grammar and all. He had mastered everything.
And Swamiji loved his this.
Yeah, you would often have great discussions with Swami Vivekananda. So let us stop here. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri